happy in a way that is also very sad, but to be here tonight. I wrote up a little bit of an intro because knowing me, I would probably ramble a lot if I were just to be put up here. So I'm gonna read that. Just as a little heads up, to go through run of show tonight, we're gonna have Mandy read some poems. It's gonna be amazing. We're gonna watch Mona's work in progress film, and then there's gonna be a Q&A afterwards up here on the stage. If you need the restroom or water, it's just outside this theater. If you go straight up the ramp and then take a left and then look to your right, you'll see the restrooms there and a water fountain. And there's also snacks and food available in the grab-and-go cooler at Heirloom Cafe. So even though you don't see anyone at the counter, if your blood sugar is getting a little low and you need something, there are options out there for you. It's just like a self-checkout. Okay. Exactly 1 year ago, on September 6th, 2023, which was also a Wednesday, I got up at this very same podium, at this very same time, and addressed an audience in this very same theater. That was for a program of short films collected under the title of My Eye Has No Iris, Collected Short Films by Palestinian Women. A year ago, I got up here and talked about dreams. I talked about dreams as a way of practicing non-compliance, of evading the violence of borders, of listening to ancestors. And today I can't help but feel like that line of thinking was kind of naive. Not that I don't believe in the subversive power of dreams, I still really do, but it just doesn't seem like enough right now. So people talk a lot about numbers these days, about dates in history, about when history started, about how many people have died. The number 40,000's been coming up. When talking about how many Palestinians have been murdered, I read that the Lancet Medical Journal published a letter in July estimating that indirect deaths caused by factors like disease might mean the death toll is several times higher, maybe above 186,000, and that's like 3 times the size of OSU for some context. I want to really sit with the fact that each individual death fundamentally alters the fabric of reality. It changes the air around us. It changes the heart rate of our beating earth. What do we do with 186,000 souls unjustly and violently extinguished in less than a year? Mona's film opens with an excerpt from a documentary where Edward Said visits Palestine for what I think is the last time in his life. She pulls a direct quote from this film. These are the atoms out of which the tragedy of Palestine is constructed. These impossibly violent deaths that are somehow possible change the atoms that surround us here in this very room. I'm grateful to Mona for always pulling Palestine back to us here in Ohio, for not letting it slip away from here and now. A year ago, as tonight, that film program was opened by reading poems. Then it was Sara Abu Rashed's words. Tonight, it's Mandy Shunnarah's, both fierce writers with their heart always pointing towards their people. I'm so grateful to connect Mandy's written words to Mona's moving images tonight. Please note that although this screening is of a work in progress, it's not necessarily a feedback screening. It's very rare and special for an artist to trust us with a work in progress in this way. I invite everyone here to hold this work in your mind as you might anything that is still becoming itself, with curiosity and care. Please welcome me in joining Mandy Shunnarah to the stage for a reading of their work. Stick around afterwards for a Q&A with Mona, moderated by Mandy. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I also encourage everyone in this room to reference the notes for information about where to learn more about local and international organizations working to bring aid and care into Palestine. Thank you so much.
Step is deceptively tall. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Layla, for organizing this event. Thank you to the Wex. It's a real honor to be here, especially with Mona, who it's wild to think about I've only known for a little over a year, but it feels like I've known her my whole life, which I think is a common feeling among Palestinians. It's like we meet another one of us and it's instantly like, okay, we're family, we're cousins. So I'm going to read you a set of poems. All of these poems will be, and this is like brand new news, this is actually the first time I get to say it out loud in front of a crowd, in my new poetry collection that will be coming out in April called We Had Mansions. Thank you so much. So this first poem that I'm going to read for you is actually the poem that opens the collection. And throughout all of these poems, you'll hear me mention Sido and Teta. Those are the words for grandfather and grandmother in Arabic. And they were a huge influence on my life. And they're from the Ramallah area in the West Bank. And they are the reason I'm alive. They survived the Nakba, they ran to Beirut and then boarded a ship to the US, and the rest is history, as they say. So all of my poems are for them, deep down, but they're for all of my people and all of us. So without further ado, Ars Poetica of Partridges in Palestine. Sido told me our last name means partridge, that sweet little bird in the pear tree every Christmas. I'm looking for metaphors on Wikipedia again. It's easy to write poems about birds with so many species of partridges. National Geographic says 43 of those species are decreasing in population, something Palestinians know all too well. People like poems about birds more than they like poems about Palestine and actual Palestine and her endangered people. We just won't go extinct quickly enough, but I digress. That's not the metaphor I'm looking for just yet. They interviewed an avian ecologist who says partridges are ground dwellers, unlikely to roost in pear trees. So those first day of Christmas birds of the family Phasinidae, presents from one's true love, were put in pear trees against their will. Branches like an open-air prison the world ignores because at least they can still see sky. Some might say I'm reaching. That's what metaphors do. But inside them, there's always a feather of truth. This I know, when it comes to partridges in Palestine, the pervasive popular messaging around us both is false. The difference is, everyone knows senselessly killing birds is wrong. So a lot of these poems today are on the subject of nature and relationship to the land, and I chose those intentionally because that's so much of what you're gonna see in Mona's film. So this next one is called The Clamshell. It's about grief. The weight is in the shoulders, slumped, hunched, round as a clamshell. I waded into a creek once and spotted the sheen through mud cloud water. Cracked open, her freshwater pearl long drifted on the riffles. The barren mother, hollowed out, twinkled. The eye socket is a clamshell scientists call the orbital bones. Grief is an orbit, so we weep from there, circling like a satellite, a celestial nautilus on its prescribed track. In the scoop of lacrimosa bone, tears forge in friction like pearls. Both coerced from their harbors by strain. Pick your pain up by the shell and rinse in the waters where it once was nourished. When you see the treasure lost, look again and find the iridescent gleam, resilient as stars. This one too was inspired by a hike. I'm constantly thinking about my relationship to the land as a person indigenous to Palestine, but who can really never go there, and who can certainly never live there. And I know that's a question that Mona has asked often in her work as well, because actually the film of hers that they showed last year was about that very subject, and was actually the first thing I ever saw of Mona's. So it is a film I've watched many, many times and is really close to my heart, and it's an honor to be in conversation with her. And I see this poem definitely in that vein. It's called The Naturalist. The forest is lavish with treasures, pocketable wonders, worn smooth stones, burrowing animal bones, crisp husks of flown cicadas, outgrown shells of river snails. I take what calls to me, what wills itself to be found. I don't seek this fortune, these riches search me out. There's a dome of ancient land that should be mine, taken before my ancestors imagined me. And on the other side of the world, half a century later, I collect what the land willingly gives. My partner says, I think you were a naturalist in a former life. Perhaps, or maybe, I'm just Palestinian in this one. This next poem I actually dedicated to Mona because she inspired it. It's called A Train Derails in Ohio and They Still Won't Say the Name of My Country. And so you can guess what that's about. But it's really weird being a Palestinian journalist right now because Western media has so thoroughly failed our people and the profession itself in terms of covering this genocide. And I noticed that when the train derailed, it was like they didn't want to say Palestine, and they kept calling it Palestine, and just being really weird about it. And I was talking to Mona about this, because she was posting on Instagram stories like, they just really won't say Palestine. And so we got to talking, and she said, somebody should write a poem about that. And I thought, well, I guess I'm somebody. So maybe I'll write a poem about it. So I had to dedicate it to her. So Mona, this one is very literally for you. A train derails in Ohio, and they still won't say the name of my country. The way the news anchors talk, it could have happened anywhere. Main Street of small Townsville, south of North and east of West. Let your imagination do the navigating. The linguistic gymnastics, the dance of verbiage, the passive voice they call objectivity. They say Eastern Ohio, rural Ohio, on the Pennsylvania border. Voices balking at the town's name. Even though it's not East Palestine as in the West Bank, but East Palestine as in a white man in Ohio who read the newspaper and knew geography from other white men, thought it was a neat name. On derailment day, metal beams and railroad ties split the town with fire, leaving chemical miasma in their wake. Broken axle, a penny on the rails, same difference. Bitter particles lodge in throats. Chickens quake and keel during the controlled burn, but the Army says there's nothing toxic about spilled vinyl chloride and butyl acrylate, but it's already flavoring the water, already salting the air. Just one of many moonlit rides through East Palestine, but you only hear about destruction when it becomes disaster. The cameras only turn on when suffering is entertaining. Our rescuers tell us there's nothing wrong as we watch our world ablaze. At least one Palestine has deliverers and redeemers. At least one Palestine hasn't been forsaken. When one burns, it's not just the will of a cruel God. So fun fact, that is actually how we have so many names of towns that are named after other places but pronounced wrong. It was like back in the day when, newspapers took 2 weeks to deliver a story because that was just the era, and people didn't have radio and much less video, so they had no idea how to actually pronounce a thing. They would just read about it and assume. So the more you know. And speaking of being a Palestinian media person right now, which again is really weird. I wrote a poem after the 40 beheaded babies hoax that they were pushing, because CNN was actually one of the news outlets that were really pushing that, narrative, even after, and they didn't do a good job retracting it, even after they found out it was false. But of course they should have confirmed it before they published all that in the first place. So a CNN reporter, Sarah Sidner, had to issue an apology, and her tweet became the epigraph of this poem called "The Damage Has Been Done." So the epigraph is, yesterday, the Israeli Prime Minister's office said that it had confirmed Hamas beheaded babies and children while we were live on the air. The Israeli government now says today it cannot confirm babies were beheaded. I need to be more careful with my words, and I am sorry. This is my response. If only apologies could bring the dead back, uncrush the child's skull under stories of fallen apartment buildings, unspool the bullet from the pregnant woman's back, un-airstrike Gaza. If only newspaper corrections issued hours or days later, and always at the bottom of the page, could resurrect our martyrs, restore the child's skin so parents could identify his face. If only propaganda were just an innocent mistake that didn't lead to a boy stabbed in Chicago and calls for Palestinians to be hunted in Dearborn. Oh, innocent mistake, that fatal oxymoron. If only regretful notes could be printed on shrouds, then those apologies would be good for something. The damage has been done. Our morgues are full, as well as our ice cream trucks and our mass graves. We're running out of flags and white sheets to bury our dead. Sorry doesn't begin to cover it. So I like to end on a happy poem, and I promise not all of my work is doom and gloom. There's so much beauty in Palestinian culture, and I'm really, proud to come from a literary tradition that loves its poets. And so I like to write hopeful things as well. This one is inspired by one of Gaza's most famous living poets, Mossab Abu Toha. Actually, his collection, Things You May Find Hidden in My Ear, is in the Wexner store. I highly recommend it. But he had this poem called We Love What We Have that went kind of viral. And a line in that poem became the jumping off point for this next poem. Whereas he wrote, "We love what we have," I wrote, "We love what we long for," and I see them in conversation. So the epigraph from his poem that I used here is, "What's here is something that we are still building. It's something we cannot yet see because we are a part of it." And so I go from there into my poem. Palestinians are siblings to longing and cousins to hope. I carry the memories of my Sido and Teta in my blood and bones. I touch the tattoos of a thobe against my skin, though I've never worn it. I feel Sido's worry beads in my pocket, though I've never carried them. I feel the Ramallah desert sun on my flesh, though I've never basked in it. I smell the smoky scent of red poppies, though I've never picked a bouquet. I sense the Oud's plucked notes through the city, though I've never heard a chord. I feel the cool metal key to my grandparents' stone house, raised before I was born. I savor the oil mashed from the family olive trees, though I've never fed upon their nectar. I taste the ripe homeland figs, though I've never tongued the toothsome fruit. The hope for a free Palestine makes us daydreamers and time travelers. I yearn for what I fear I'll never have. I long for the simplest of pleasures. I dream of a bare spot among the poppies, the sun on my face, figs on my tongue, a picnic on the Jordan River bank, and a key in my pocket to a home I can return to. Thank you all so much, and give it up for Mona.